Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money.
So let me start with, Brendan, you are a federal prosecutor and served as special counsel for private equity in the Justice Department's Antitrust Division. What does that mean? What do you do?
Thank you so much and for the time. And I should say off the bat that I'm speaking in my personal capacity, not as an employee of the Justice Department. So they were kind enough to give me leave to write this book, which I was very interested in on private equity generally.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So it might be helpful for me to talk about generally what private equity is, just so that we sort of have some ground rules. And I think you sort of alluded to this earlier, that it's a term that I think a lot of people have heard, but very few people really know what it means. And I confess that I didn't know what it was until after I had gotten the book deal. So the general idea is, private equity firms use a little bit of their own money, some of their investors' money, and a whole lot of borrowed money to buy up companies. They then try to transform those companies, either operationally or financially, and then sell them, hopefully in their minds, for a profit a few years later. To your point earlier about what distinguishes private equity from sort of the public markets, it is in large part a matter of regulation and a matter of control. When a big company needs money, they'll do an initial public offering. And in exchange for being able to broadly solicit for investments, they have obligations. They have to file quarterly or annual statements, things like that. They have obligations for their boards of directors, independents, and so forth. Private equity is a lot looser. Because it's a more focused investment, they don't have the same sort of disclosure obligations. They don't have the same sort of duties. And as I argued, that leads to some of the problems that we've seen in the private equity industry.
So, Brendan, is not the problem with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, and all that, is that the rules they played by are different as far as the finance rules? And that's why they're in trouble today, because they played by different sets of rules and they broke the banking rules. So I see it all day long. That's my business.
Well, I'm an antitrust lawyer, not a securities lawyer. So any good securities lawyer will, or banking regulation lawyer will hear me spouting off and they'll get mad. So I don't want to get too far away from my expertise. But, I
just want to let people know it's every day I see it. When I drive in a poor neighborhood, what I see them is breaking the law. And today they want to defund the police and all this stuff. They break zoning laws. They break zoning codes. And anytime you break the law, you have problems. And so that's what I'm trying to say to you. Being court-martialed twice made me this reformed alcoholic on the laws. So anyway, your day in court is perfect, Brendan. You're a young guy, but you deal with old guys like me all the time.
Well, it is very important to follow the law. And I will say, whether or not any individual bank is breaking the law, one of the challenges that we've got is there's a whole lot of sort of regulatory arbitrage. Banks have a lot of opportunities to choose who their regulator will be, both at the state and federal level. And that can be a problem for banks. It can be a problem for regulators, and obviously it can be a problem for customers too. The challenge that we got with private equity is they essentially are unregulated, at least compared to banks. A national bank might be, regulated by the Fed, the FDIC, or the OCC. A private equity firm, there's complications to this. I don't want to oversimplify it, but their main regulation is just a few forms that they have to file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, again, lawyers that work on securities will, I'm sure, be having a little bit of a headache hearing me say that. But the point is just that private equity is a vastly less regulated world compared to the banking industry.
So, Brendan, when you say it's unregulated, how does that play out? How do they use their position to do what they do?
Yeah. So one of the challenges that we've got is private equity firms are very rarely held legally or financially responsible for the consequences of their actions. So one of the stories that I think is really distressing is a private equity firm bought the second largest nursing home chain in America. So the firm was called Carlyle. It bought up HCR Manor Care. For a variety of reasons, it dramatically cut staffing. It levered the company up with debt. And it drove down the quality of care. And unsurprisingly, when family members, saw that their parents were suffering, people were actually dying in these nursing homes, some families sued both the nursing home and the private equity firm. But at that point, the private equity firm said, oh, no. We are not the technical owners of this nursing home. In fact, we merely manage a series of funds that are limited partners through a series of shell companies ultimately own the assets of this nursing home. And the result was that their case against the private equity firm was dismissed. So the private equity firm had the control over the nursing home, but it didn't have any of the responsibility. It's a classic principal agent problem.
And it also had the profits.
Well, one more second. And everybody, what Brendan is talking about, his book is called Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. And Brendan, Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, the right book at the right time. So congratulations, because I'm on the Plunder side. Legally, I've already done my time in court and I don't want to do that again. So just to let you know, well, what Brendan's book is talking about is essential for you guys to read. If you guys own a 401k or a stock or you invest in Amazon and all that, Amazon started off as private equity. Most of these companies do. And if you understand that, then you'll understand what Brendan's talking about and how the whole system is different. So when it goes public through an initial public offering, like Kim and I have done 3 of them, it's a whole different set of laws and rules. But the same thing you read in my book, Cash Flow Quadrant, ESB and the I, the tax laws are different. And what Brendan is talking about being a young attorney right now, like I said, he deals with old guys like me all the time in court. So Brendan, congratulations on the book. Your timing is impeccable.
And Brendan, you made a really good point. You talked about the company that came in and they started cutting jobs. So a lot of these private equity firms, to get their bottom line, bottom dollar up, they cut people, they cut services, they cut at the expense. So how does government play into this? Are they in collusion with these firms, or what's the deal? Because they're very tough on the IPO, on the public companies. Why not private equity?
I think private equity firms have been tremendously successful in advancing their policy agendas through the various arms of government, whether that's Congress, regulators at the federal level, at the state level, or independent agencies, or essentially non-governmental agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I wouldn't necessarily lay the blame for layoffs on the government, but maybe to give you an example of how government can kind of help these sort of extractive schemes. One of the things that private equity firms have been really successful at doing is in sloughing off the pension obligations of the companies that they buy. So to take one example, Friendly's was an ice cream.
Friendly's, yeah.
Was an ice cream and diner shop primarily in the Northeast. Started during World War II. Or the Great Depression. A private equity firm bought it, I believe, in the 2000s. Ultimately, laid off a lot of employees and declared bankruptcy. But what they did is they did this little maneuver that was really clever. They sold the company, Friendly's, from itself to itself in the bankruptcy process. And now, why would you do that? By doing that, they were able to sort of slough off the pension obligations that the company had onto a quasi-government agency called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. Right. So what it meant is they got to retain control of the company in bankruptcy, but they no longer had the pension obligations. And the bankruptcy court,
Brendan, it's also called a 401k.
Well, 401ks are interesting too, because traditionally,
that's what I'm saying. That's what happened. It was a shift from a defined benefit to defined contribution pension plan. And that's why in 2000, I wrote the book, Who Stole My Pension? Is the pensions, the reason they have a 401k is very simply because for big corporations like Ford Motor Company and IBM and Xerox, the biggest expense are employees' pensions. And so the reason my generations, the boomer generations in 74, ERISA was passed. You know what ERISA is, Employee Retirement Income Securities Act. It was a shift from a defined benefit pension plan to a defined contribution pension plan, which is the IRA and a 401k. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the employees don't. But that's why we created Rich Dad Company. And why I wrote the book, ESB&I, Cash Flow Quadrant, is so employees could understand the idea of going to school and getting a job, probably the riskiest thing you can do.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned 401ks because private equity firms need money. They need money to
That's where they get the money from.
Well, historically, this is the really interesting thing, is private equity firms have historically gotten their money from pension funds. But to your point, pension funds are a smaller and smaller piece of the pie.
Yes.
So there has been a move for private equity firms to get access to 401k money. And historically, they haven't gotten that. But thanks to a concerted lobbying effort in 2020, they have essentially gotten the legal sign-off to start getting 401k money. So
they take the 401k money and the employees never get it.
Well, the danger would be that they take the 401k money and then use it to buy up a company that perhaps they, do a layoff on, push into bankruptcy, something like that. So it could ultimately be destructive for a lot of ordinary workers.
Yeah. That's a lot of the guys in our neighborhood do. That's what Scott does. So if you understand that the pension money is big money, it's huge money. And the employees, in our school systems that go to school, get a job and get a 401k, I'm going, the teachers are complicit in the crime. That's my point of view. Do I mean, because they don't educate the people on the finance side, how risky that is. I'm just coming from the other side of the coin, Brendan. You're a young guy. You deal with guys like me all the time.
The challenge that we've got that private equity firms face with pension money isn't whether pensions themselves are good or bad. It's that they've run out of them. That they need more money, and they have essentially, I don't want to overstate the case, but they're increasingly exhausting the amount of money that they can get from pension funds, which is why they're increasingly turning to plans like 401ks.
Yeah. So can I ask you one more thing? How do they get the government to change the laws?
So there was really interesting reporting about this, is that there was a concerted decade-long lobbying campaign
Of course, that's called the politicians. It's called Nancy Pelosi and those guys. All those characters take money from rich guys. You know that. I know that. Why don't you just tell the truth?
Ultimately, it's a bipartisan campaign push to give these firms access to 401k money. Now, there are still legal issues that are going to hold up a private equity firm from getting 401k funds. It hasn't quite happened yet, but that's certainly on their agenda.
Brendan, you're a great man. I'll tell you what, I love talking to you right now. Your book, Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, is the right book at the right time. I mean, you and I are on the same team.
And we're going to take a break right now, but when we come back, I want to find out, Brendan, why you're sounding this warning to everybody, and what is in it for how is that going to affect the average individual?
Amen, brother. You're at the right time, please, everybody get Brendan's book, because he does it from the other side. We'll be right back.
Robert already warned us, 2023 is going to be the year of lost wealth. After all, Goldman Sachs predicts you'll see zero returns from stocks for the rest of 2023. And investors like you have already made a record number of emergency hardship withdrawals from their 401ks. Now a stunning survey reveals that over half the Americans making six figures are living paycheck to paycheck, combined with tens of thousands of layoffs in just the last few weeks. It becomes clear that a financial storm is brewing and nobody is safe. But if you think brilliant investors like Robert are letting their money waste away in a 60-40 portfolio, think again. For years, Robert and other experts have been investing millions into low correlation assets that can still climb when the stock market flatlines. And according to a recent Citibank report, of the major asset classes, the lowest correlation belongs to art. That's right. Contemporary art prices have outpaced the S&P 500's total return over the last 26 years by 131%. Now you can enter this market without needing millions, thanks to Masterworks, our longtime partner. Their platform lets you invest in shares of paintings by icons like Picasso and Banksy. Every single one of Masterworks' 12 exits to date have delivered positive returns to their investors, with their last two sales returning 10 and and 35% net. In fact, just since our last episode, Masterworks sold another offering, handing back a 15.4% net profit after just 36 days. No wonder over 680,000 users have invested more than $500 million on Masterworks. Offerings have sold out in minutes, but Rich Dad listeners can skip the waitlist by going to masterworks.art/richdad. That's masterworks.art/richdad. See important disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. If you're concerned about high inflation, looming recession, a stock market correction, or out of control spending in Washington, this is an important message to hear. Because the fact is, during every major crisis in U.S. history, many of those who failed to prepare watch their savings, investments, or retirement funds go down, while many with the foresight to own gold helped preserve their purchasing power. Gold even made some folks richer. Now we're facing several major crises at once, and experts say we may soon face even more economic trouble. So please don't wait. Learn the simple way you can diversify with gold and put yourself on the road to financial peace of mind, even in uncertain times. The new free 2023 Gold Guide from our friends at Gold Alliance can show you how. Just visit www.freegoldguide.com/Robert or call 1-800-473-4585. Republican Governor and conservative commentator Mike Huckabee says Gold Alliance is the only gold provider he recommends to his friends and family. Find out why and visit freegoldguide.com/Robert or call now at 1-800-473-4585.
Feeling powerless over current events and your financial future? Financial freedom is your freedom. Robert Kiyosaki is the best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Over 40 million people have taken Robert's advice. Now it's your turn. Attend Robert's free virtual wealth building event. Claim your free access now at richdadfree.com. Don't wait, access is limited. Go to richdadfree.com. That's richdadfree.com.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. Today, our guest is Brendan Ballou, The Perfect Time, the perfect book at the perfect... I cannot believe, Brendan, I'm going to sell as many books for you as I can because his name is Brendan Ballou, Ballou. His book is called Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. And as Brendan knows, most of the people listening to Rich Dad know, I always talk about all coins have three sides: heads, tails, and the edge of the coin. And Brendan comes from the other side of the coin. And he's going to tell you what happens from the other side. It is, in my opinion, for those who are really concerned about what's going on in the world of money, education, when they say go to school, get a job, get a 401k or an IRA. Brendan's book, Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, is the single most important book you can read, especially for your kids who are in college thinking that a 401k is going to save your life. So, Brendan, thank you for being part of the show. You and I are on the opposite sides of the coin. But I'm honored.
Thank you for the time.
I am honored to be pitching your book for you.
So, Brendan, what is it what do people need to know? What come down to the nitty gritty? What do people need to know?
Sure. So, my argument is that private equity, it's not about people there being good or bad or nefarious or broad-minded. It's that the private equity business model is essentially broken. There are three basic problems with private equity. They invest for the short term. They tend to load up the companies they buy with a lot of debt and extract fees. And they tend to be insulated from their consequences of their actions, both legally and financially. And what those three problems mean is that when private equity firms buy companies, it often leads to really bad consequences, whether it's layoffs or bankruptcies. Sometimes companies are pushed into actions that violate the law. It's not that the people that run private equity firms are good or bad. It's that they've got a broken business model, broken in the same way that savings and loans were broken in the 1980s, broken in the way that conglomerates were in the 1960s, broken in the way that the trusts in the 2010s were, or in the 1910s were. So it's trying to help people understand what's not working in the business model and how we can fix it.
So if a private equity firm comes into the company, are the chances of that company going bankrupt greater?
According to at least one study, about 10 times greater. So
that's a hell of a study. Wow.
The overall bankruptcy rate in the control group was about 2%. I think it was 20% for the ones that were purchased by private equity firms.
And
now, obviously,
if they don't go bankrupt, the employees get screwed. That's what you're saying.
The challenge that you've got is that these firms tend to hold the companies only for a few years. You guys are investors and have been executives before. If you're thinking about a company for 10, 20, 30 years, you invest in the company, physically, operationally, and the employees. If you plan to hold a company for 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, you're not going to invest in employees in the same way. And in fact, you might see a quick profit by laying a lot of employees off.
Yeah. So,
amen, brother.
And
amen. You're saying it, man. You and I are on this. No, Brendan, you and I are on the same side. And I am not kidding you. You have no idea how much it pisses me off.
Well, it's like the Wild West, and I think one of the key points for me, what you're talking about, is there's no consequences. So is there a solution to this? Is it regulation? Is it what would be a solution?
Yeah, there's a very long chapter at the end that lays out very specifically what needs to happen. Now, obviously, Congress could take action if it wants to essentially change the incentives of private equity firms to think for the long term, to not load companies up with debt, to hold them legally responsible. But in a world of gridlock, we have to think about where else are there the levers of power. There's a lot things that can be done at the federal level in the agencies, whether we're talking about the SEC, the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, HHS, and so forth. There's also a lot that can be done at the state level, whether it's state legislatures making sure that private equity firms don't do excessive dividend recapitalizations or other sort of tactics that drain companies of resources that are headquartered in their states, things that state attorneys general can take on, things that private litigants can do, things that ordinary citizens can do. I always try to explain to people, I've been a federal government employee for a little while now. It's a little hard to overstate how much the conversations and the protests outside actually impact the decision-making of people on the inside. People tweeting their complaints, their concerns actually does resonate to the, ordinary bureaucrats like me. So I think just people making their voices heard, that by itself is important.
So
you're not allowed to say, I know you're not allowed to say anything, but what influences legal system. It's always this. It's always this.
I certainly can't say about.
I know you can't say it, but that's what that's how I make my campaign contributions, Brendan.
Well, one thing, independent of sort of discussions of general corruption or anything like that. One thing that's really
campaign contributions are legal, Brendan. Don't say it's corruption, because that's a socialist point of view.
Well, they certainly are legal, but one thing that's really interesting to watch is just how outgunned people tend to be when they go up against private equity firms. One of the stories that was really distressing for me was reading about Mariner Finance, which is owned by the private equity firm Warburg Pincus. It's a payday lender, an installment lender. And what they would do is they would send out checks to people. And they would all you had to do was sign the check and you could get $1,000 for whatever it happened to be. But obviously, once you did, you would pay an extremely high interest rate. Well, there's a story of this one woman who made, I think it was $800 a month, and she got a check for $1,000. She knew that she couldn't afford it, but she needed to repair her boiler, so she cashed it. Ultimately, Mariner goes after her. She tries to sue them, but she gets diverted into the arbitration system, private arbitration, where it's very hard for plaintiffs to succeed. But conversely, when Mariner wanted to go after her, they could use the state court system and potentially even garnish her wages through the state court system. So you've got a system.
I say this, the reason she can't go after him is she doesn't have money.
She doesn't have money, and she signed an agreement that
I understand. But what happens to most employees and small people? They don't have the money to hire an attorney to go after the system. That's
exactly.
Hey, Brendan, that's a fact, Jack.
And one of the concerning things is because private equity is so profitable and such an increasingly large part of the economy, they've really been able to dominate the largest law firms. If you look at the history of some of the sort of name brand law firms that are out there, you can see that, I wouldn't say a majority, but a large percentage of their work is coming from private equity firms. So
yes, thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, when a firm gets into trouble, the chances are not only are they going to have the money to litigate it for a long time, they're going to be represented by some of the highest paid lawyers in the country.
Amen, brother.
And then so to put it in perspective, I'm going back to the consequences thing. So if a private equity company came in and bought the Rich Dad company, and they do fire employees and do all these things, and the employees come and sue, or a customer comes and sues, because we're the owners of the company, or we are the executors, we were the executives of the company. Are we then held responsible, and the private equity firm is not?
At a very high level, typically that's how it would often happen. So if somebody wanted to sue a private equity owned company, they could sue for the assets of the company. It would be very hard for them to sue for the assets of the private equity firm through a doctrine that's called piercing the corporate veil. Yeah. One of the really challenging things is that
what we teach?
That's what we teach.
We teach that. You can't do that. You don't have enough money to do that.
Well, you guys, one of the things that's really interesting is private equity firms have gotten really invested into nursing homes. And there's some academic work out there that says that private equity purchases in nursing homes are responsible for an estimated 20,000 premature deaths over a little more than a decade. So very concerning. The problem is when families try to sue, they're blocked by these sort of corporate veil piercing doctrines and things like that. But also there's really interesting reporting about how private equity firms and other investors will often shift the assets of the nursing home to shell companies that are very hard to track.
Yep.
And so what this means is if your, mother or father dies in a nursing home and you try to sue, it may be very hard for you to recover any money because the entity that you sue on paper doesn't have any assets. And in fact, those assets have been moved to related companies.
You have no idea. Brendan, I love you, man. You have no idea. You sing the same song we sing.
Well, I appreciate the time.
No, you really do. I mean, I'm going to use this interview this week because that's what we're teaching. Okay. I asked my attorney, because we do these public workshops, and I asked my attorney to wear a suit. And he says, but it's a public kind of off, weekend seminar. I said, I want you to give dignity to the justice system because it's been gone. It's gone. And what you're saying, my friend, is crucial for everybody to understand. I am not kidding you.
And I think it's so crucial for companies who are bringing in a private equity firm to understand this. I mean, this is, a lot of people, most people, especially small companies, aren't going to be aware that they're going to get raped and pillaged by these private equity firms, and they're going to be on the hook for the consequences if it goes south.
No, the employees don't know what they're doing.
Well, the employees, but also the owners of the company who bring in the private equity firms, they're not aware either of what can happen.
There are some of the speakers at this weekend event is how they did it. How they took a private company public. They took a private company and sold to private equity. I want you to know, man, your book, Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, and you send me some copies, I will promote the shit out of it for you.
That's very kind of you. We'll talk to the public.
Not kind. I do have a conscience left.
Well, and I don't want to talk your ear off, but one of the really interesting things is, this is not to say that every private equity firm is evil, or any private equity firm is evil, or that every private equity acquisition is going to end in disaster. But to your point, a lot of small business owners just don't really understand what's involved.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yep. I mean, I've been talking to some firms lately who have been interested, and this we decided we're not going to go that route. But I didn't have even what you're just saying today is eye-opening for me. Eye-opening.
Yeah. And we've been seeing this happen with small medical professions that, practices that have been getting bought up, and, a lot of the employees, doctors, nurses, and so forth have really been regretting those acquisitions.
Yep.
And Brendan, you may not know this, but one of our biggest acquisitions, nursing homes. Him and I do. So,
but not private equity.
Not private equity, but we do own the nursing homes. Yeah. And what you're saying is terrifying. I am really not kidding, Brendan. How fast can you get me some books? I'll promote the heck out of it this weekend.
That's kind of you. We'll talk and we'll coordinate.
Yeah. I'll get with Paul.
You're not a salesman. I would say I'll get them to you tonight. That's the difference. You want to talk about it, the seminar will be over and you're going to miss one of the biggest sales. I'm a best-selling officer. I'm never going to get a Pulitzer Prize for my writing ability, but I can sell the shit out of books.
This is why
your book, Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. So I'm going to give you an extra 10 minutes when we come back. I never do this for any guest. But I want you, within the legal parameters of your profession, your professional, law, your code of ethics, what can you say to people about why your book is important they read? It is within the confines of your legal profession. Okay? So when we come back, Brendan, we're going to give you an extra 10 minutes. Hit your heart out, man. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. We have a very special guest, a very courageous man. His name is Brendan, Brendan, Ballou, Ballou. Great movie called Cat Ballou years ago, starring Lee Marvin. But also, it was another great movie called My Cousin Vinny. And in there, it talks about, and Brendan says it's one of the more accurate shows there is, starring Joe Pesci, I think is all it is. And he shows up in court in a leather jacket. He says, the judge says, never wear anything that's made of animal skins. But anyway, with that, Brendan's book is Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. He's on the same side as Kim and I are. You're educating people on what's really happening in the world. Companies like Blackstone, what's going on with Credit Suisse, what's going on with Deutsche Bank. It's all of these companies, all these so-called assets going bad. Because they're not assets, because private equities are screwing it up. Now, Brendan may not know this, but that's my business, is how we do that. So you have 10 minutes to pitch your book legally within the confines of your straitjacket suit there, okay? What can you say? Why should people read Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America by Brendan, Brendan Ballou?
Well, I don't think anybody wants to listen to a lawyer talk for 10 minutes.
No, that's why I'm giving it a shot.
Yeah, I think I can do it in 2. Private equity firms are entities that a lot of people haven't heard of, but they are transforming your life. When you go to a gas station, you may be inadvertently helping to pay a private equity firm. When you buy contact lenses or go to a veterinarian, if you go to an OBGYN or visit a family member in a nursing home, you may be helping a private equity firm. Firms like Carlyle, KKR, and Blackstone, these are names that most people haven't heard of, but if they were considered together with their portfolio companies, they would be the 3rd, 4th, and 5th largest employers in America.
Please say those names again, because what you're talking about are the Amazon of the legal system, what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's KKR, Carlyle, and Blackstone, and they would be the largest employers in America with their portfolio companies after only Walmart and Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Despite their relative anonymity, I always say private equity firms are poised to transform the economy in this decade, the way that subprime lenders did in the decade before that, and the way that and big tech did in the 2010s. And the really important point is they are doing all of this with the help of the government, from state and local state and local police to nursing home regulators to Fannie and Freddie Mac.
And why are you have a legal jacket on? It's also called a straight jacket. But you have a Armani suit on, I hope.
I'm a government employee. It's not that expensive.
So what is the constraint? Why are you so hesitant to say what you? I mean, I know you're not supposed to, but what are the constraints? Why are you guys put on a straight jacket?
Well, actually, I push back on that ever so slightly in that I don't think that I've gotten a straitjacket from my employer, who actually was, incredibly kind and giving me the time off to write this book.
Who's your employer?
The Department of Justice, ultimately, which is where
Amen, brother. Thank you. Tell them thank you for me.
Yeah. Well, and, the interesting thing is there's a huge agenda of things that can be done by the federal government, but also by the state government, local governments, ordinary citizens to sort of constrain the power of private equity. One thing that I don't think people really understand is how much of police and prison work is now owned by private equity. So, for instance, if you're in prison and need to make a phone call, the chance is really good that phone call is being managed by a private equity firm. If you need to get healthcare in a prison, that also is probably managed by a private equity firm. If you get, let's say you drink too much one night and have to spend a night in jail, they take your money. Nowadays, there's a good chance you won't get your cash back the next morning. In fact, you'll get a debit card that is owned by a private equity firm. And using that card will have an activation fee, a activity fee, a balance inquiry fee, and a closing fee. So all the operations of prisons, or many of the operations of prisons, are controlled by private equity firms. And that's something that really state and local governments can move on. So there's a lot that can be done within the government and outside of it. We just need the ambition to act.
So, Brendan, would you say that you talk about the impact of the future and how private equity is such as like the next subprime and all of this? Is the problem that now our companies are only looking at the bottom line profit, no fundamentals, they don't care about the employees? And I'm not saying every private equity company, but that is the problem that you're making people aware of, that how we do business is now totally changed.
It's a great question. I think that, people have always been ambitious. People have always wanted to make money. That's not a problem at all. That's, how the capitalist system works. One of the basic challenges that we have with private equity isn't that they want to make money, but that they aren't thinking long-term at all. Often their investment horizons are 3, 4, or 5 years. Yep. And if you've only got a few years to make money, you're not going to invest in the long-term sustainability of the companies that you buy.
Correct.
Brendan, bless you, my friend.
Nicely said. Thank you.
So another thing, like with Blackstone, one of the reasons your gas prices are going up is because they shut down drilling. They work with, and this is my world, man. I'm a driller. Everybody, you're a criminal because you provide gasoline for the public. I mean, if we didn't provide gasoline for the public, guess what happened? The economy would stop. But they work for. Now, please hear me. You can learn, because you don't have to say something to get in trouble, but that's what Blackstone's doing. They're just like Biden. They're shutting down our drilling, which is why just 2 days ago, Saudi Arabia just shut down. They're not going to pump as much oil. What that does is raise prices on gasoline. That's called inflation. Everybody's going to pay for that, Brendan. Everybody's going to pay for that.
Well, ultimately, the sort of fight over ESG is slightly separable. So it's, Blackstone has gotten a little bit of criticism. It's actually BlackRock that, which is not a private equity firm, has been getting most of the ESG criticism. The interesting things about a lot of private equity firms is that they've actually been very invested in non-renewable resources. So I think that's a slightly separable debate, but I think the common story is that private equity firms often are not thinking long-term, whether that's long-term for employees or long-term for the environment.
Yep.
Brendan, what you're saying, you and I are on the same team, except that you're on the legal side.
Well, I appreciate the endorsement, and I really appreciate the time. This is very kind of you.
And I would love to have, I don't know if you can do it, but next time I have this event, you can be our star speaker. I'll make sure you're recorded so your boss will know that you abided by the laws, because I don't. Not that I don't, but I have more freedom to say than you do.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and really I appreciate just the time to talk about this stuff.
Thank you, Brendan.
And tell your boss, thank you. Again, the book is called Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. And we need more people like Brendan Ballou who buys by the rules and will write a book about it. So, Brendan, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, my friend. I will sell a lot of books for you. We'll be right back with Brendan. Thank you. Really, sincerely, thank you.
Thanks,
we'll be
Brendan.
right back.
Take care.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. I want to very sincerely thank our guest, Brendan Ballou, Ballou. His book is Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. It pisses me off that people don't care. So anyway, the book is called Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America. Please get the book, especially if your school teacher told you to go to school, get a job, and get a 401k. You're being screwed. Comments, Kim?
So the main takeaways for me from what Brendan is saying and with his book Plunder is, number one, the private equity firms are in it for short term. They want to make as much money as they can in the short term. They don't think long term about employees. They don't think long term about the company. They don't think long term, and that the fact that private equity companies, if they take over a company, your chance of bankruptcy is 10 times greater than if you don't have a private equity firm. Now, I'm not saying all private equity firms are bad, because they're not. They do some good things, but their fundamentals or what they're after is very different than maybe what you and I want.
But that's why Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank and Bank of Japan are in serious trouble, is because of their short-term thinking.
Yeah.
If you understand a financial statement, the balance sheet, you'll understand what Brendan's talking about. Unfortunately, he doesn't, because he's an attorney. Sarah, comment on this.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how far-reaching private equity is. Nursing homes, I would have never associated that with private equity. So many things. And they kind of get you on the inside, on both ends. So if they take over a company, they're going to get rid of employees most likely, because like you'd mentioned, they want a healthy bottom line.
No, employees are expensive, and the pensions are extremely expensive.
Yep. And so here's the case is, don't be an employee. It's another layer of becoming an entrepreneur and not relying on anybody else.
But you might want to check out, if you are looking for a job, who really owns the company. You may want to check that out.
That's a great point, because if it's a 3 to 5 year kind of lifespan.
Yeah. So in personal defense of what Kim and I do, our first attorney and accountant wanted to put a 401k in. This was 25 years ago. We refused to do it. Mm-hmm. So what do we tell you guys instead?
Oh, we're all encouraged to start our own businesses or become investors and not rely on a 401k.
Yeah.
And that was the importance of this show, is because that's just another layer of making our case of why that's so important.
Final words, Kim.
Final words. I just want to say thank you to Brendan Ballou, and I really thank him for speaking out, opening up people's eyes to what's happening in the world, and keep getting educated.
Please, all of you, thank you for listening to this program. Please get Brendan's book, Private Equity. Plunder, Private Equity's Plan to Pillage America, because they are. What Brendan is saying is I could never say. So I'm going to do my best to make his book a bestseller. Final words, Sarah.
No, just appreciate his time and appreciate the conversation, because I learned a lot in this episode. Definitely more than I've learned.
Now you know why I'm such an asshole and stuff.
That has nothing to do with this show. But no, it's I learned so much, honestly, in the research to even understand what is private equity. I was like, oh, okay. So that was great.
Go to the Play the Cash Flow game. The fast track is private equity, sports fans.
It all makes sense now.
It's called private equity. So I might sell his book with my fast track on the cash flow board game. Just so all of you guys who go to school say, oh, my kid's getting a good education, and someday they'll have job security, a steady paycheck, and then they'll get a 401k or a pension. You're being set up by the academic system. Thank you for listening to Rich Dad Radio.
Great.